My name is Ryan Hawk. I'm excited to be here with all of you. I'm the host of a podcast called The Learning Leader Show. What I do on a regular basis is speak with leaders from all over the world who I try to uncover the commonalities of those who sustain excellence. And so that's why JB asked me to come host this panel with some incredible leaders. I'm excited to talk to them. But I think it's going to be a little bit different from probably what you heard earlier or throughout the course of the day. We got people from the Fortune 500 world, from sports, and we got a guy who's done a bit of everything. So I'll first introduce the panel, and then we'll get it going. By the way, if anyone has a question or a follow-up or anything that's just top of mind that you can't help but ask, feel free to raise your hand, and I'll ask it for you, and we'll make it engaging, interactive. This is for you. We're here to get any questions you have answered to make it as valuable for you as possible. Cool? Okay, first, I'll start on the end. Lara is the VP of People and Culture for the Minnesota Vikings. It's Lara Juras. Please get up. Give her a hand. Jacqueline is head of HR for General Mills. Jacqueline Williams-Roll. And Mark is serial entrepreneur on the board of the Players Tribune, amongst a bunch of other things he's done, bought and sold a lot of companies. Good culture guy. Mark French. So to get us started, if you look at this is called the talent equation. That's the purpose of us being here today, is how to acquire, attract, understand who are people that can come to our organizations, whether for athletic directors or coaches, the Fortune 500 world. How can we attract, retain, develop, and grow those types of people? So I'll start with you on the end, Lara. When you think about culture and building a culture at a place like, previously she was with the Atlanta Braves for years, and now with the Minnesota Vikings. When you think about culture, what are some of your core tenets or beliefs, philosophies on how to build an excellent culture?
Well, I think there's a variety of things that I would focus on. I think for those of you, I feel like my back's to you. I'm going to turn back a little bit. I think one of the things that's interesting in the sports world is there is a common set of themes. You know, one of them is obviously innovation. There's competition and things like that. And so to me, a lot of the building of the culture is to find people. And when Ryan and I spoke prior to this panel, I kind of commented and said that one of the things that I think we should look for all the time is people who are professionally curious and wanting to be innovative on things. In sports, I think, and this group especially would know that there is an aspect of taking initiative on your own that we want for people. You know, we can't have people that are always just waiting for instruction. We need people that are curious and they want to know why, they want to know how to fix things. And I think that that's a solid piece and part of your culture as you're putting things together, is that you don't want someone that will come in and say, well, we've always done it this way. If there's a play that works well, yes, please always do that play that way. But other than that, I mean, from a culture perspective, that's something that you need. You need to have something that people feel safe and that they can ask questions and they can learn about other aspects of the business. So, you know, foundationally, I think that's my one piece that I've recently been really, really focused on to try to say this is what's important. The flip side of it is that, you know, you have leadership that understands what the individuals want to do. One of my standard questions that I make sure the leaders understand, you know, and this has been my whole career, is 3 basic questions. You know, what motivates you? What do you, how can I help you from a feedback perspective? And then what can I do to help you? And at all times, leaders should know that information because, you know, there's nothing more interesting to someone than their own career. And so as you're building a culture, to have that care, as you would for an athlete or anything else, be part of your culture, I think is an important component as well.
Love it, love it. Professionally curious. Jacqueline, what about you?
The talent piece. Yeah, I think curiosity is really very important. What I would also tell you is, when we're thinking about who comes into our organization or who we promote, we're looking for individuals who have figured it out no matter what the circumstance. So think about individuals who have been in new, diverse circumstances. They have perhaps been faced with obstacles that at the beginning felt insurmountable. They have overcome things, they have failed. And we are really looking for individuals that can figure out, what have I done in the past that I can actually cut and paste and do again in this circumstance? What are the things that I did in the past that aren't exactly the same that I need to do in this circumstance, but I can adapt? And then where do I need to go out and learn? And so we're really looking for folks who have that ability and that agility to learn from others, from within themselves, and who say, I'm not an expert today, but I want to be an expert tomorrow. And they've got that curiosity, that intellect, and that drive to really make a difference.
I like that. I had a wise mentor tell me, he was a head of a business, that I look for people who've had success in multiple life categories, which means it can happen regardless of where you choose to go. Mark, you've been in a lot of different places. You've started businesses, you've sold them, you've partnered with a lot of people. What do you think when it comes to the businesses you've built on how to build an excellent culture?
You know, it's really interesting in the startup world. A lot of companies are trying to get around to financing, and they'll look to bring people into a team that have a strong logo from where they were before. And I've seen that work sometimes, but I've seen that fail more times than often, where you can't really teach culture. So I'm a big believer, and I've been really lucky in the last 3 ventures to do this, where let's build the culture together. Let's talk about what kind of team we want to be, and let's write it out. Let's all put it on a board and let's vote. So is everybody signing up to do this? Are we all in alignment? This is the kind of team that we want to be. And it works really well because we can hold each other accountable to it. So I've seen that work really, really well, but making it a collaborative discussion about what kind of culture are we, what kind of team are we going to be, and now let's hold each other accountable.
And Ryan, if I could add, I mean, I think something that you said is really important, Mark, because culture is an outcome. It's an outcome of how you set that strategic intent. It's an outcome of the values that you say are most important. It's an outcome of holding those teams accountable. And it's an outcome of, doing really what you said was most important. And so I think sometimes as leaders we say culture and it feels so nebulous and it's hard to explain. It's actually an easy place to put an excuse on why it's not working. Mm-hmm. And I always like to kind of dial it back and say, well, let's kind of talk about leadership, because I would submit that every single success and every single failure, when you peel it back, it all comes back to leadership. Were they clear on what was expected? Did they have the right talent on their team? Did they have the right mix on their team? And were they all kind of rowing in the same direction? So I just want to build on that point, because it's such a good one.
Lara, you talked about you work for a football team, but there's a big business organization, and then there's the football side. And I know one of your goals is to be together when how that works. And I think there's probably a lot of people in this room. I was listening to the session before, and they're talking about when you're the new head coach. And this probably is the case for an athletic director too. You're the mayor. Like, act like you're the mayor every day. People are going to see you. They're going to know you. So I think this translates well for people to say how to mesh. Like, what are some things that you do with the Vikings so that the football side and the business side are coming together? They collaborate. They talk. There's not like, we're in our camp and you're in your camp, because you got to collaborate and be together. What are some things you do with the Vikings?
Yeah, and I certainly would echo what both of you said. I mean, people make the culture, that outcome of what's out there. And some of the things I will say that we're doing are not things that I initiated specifically. I did some of them, but Kevin Warren, our COO, has been an advocate of this as well, and Rick Spielman, our GM. Part of it is, if you want to be able to collaborate and work well as a culture, you need to understand what the other groups are doing. And so for the last 4 months, we have had Rick Spielman do a football 101, walking through what they were doing at the combine, and now they're going through what's going through in the draft, and talking to the whole entire staff. And just keep in perspective for everybody who might not know, there's only 215 people full-time year-round for the football team. There's about 150 that are the business side, and then the rest are the football operations side. And so on the business side, what we're trying to do is to try to tell the football people, here's what we're trying to do to help you. And our job is to be so successful from a revenue standpoint that you can have whatever player you would like. So that's always music to their ears. But to at least understand, what both sides are doing, and to be cognizant of that. For those of you that might not know, at the Twin City Orthopedics Performance Center, which we just moved into about a year ago, is the first time that our football operations and our business operations have been in one building. And that's surprising to a lot of people, but a lot of the football teams, they're in separate places, because there is a privacy around the sporting world, as a lot of you know. And so I think a lot of what we've been trying to do is just make sure that, people understand, like, we're all part of the team, and this is what we're doing. And, as basic as it might sound to some sports people, in the combine, for example, it's like speed dating. Some of you might know this. And so one of my first intros, I went into the GM's office and he had all of his TVs on. And he's like, here's our scouting reports, and this is what we have to decide. And we talked about behavioral-based interviewing and emotional intelligence and all these other things that people might not automatically associate with athletes. But having that ability to, understand what they're looking for, what their pain points are on both sides, has been something that's been, I would say, a great culture builder as we're trying to get both sides to understand and be sensitive to either time on the field, in their offices, or really what the cadence of their day looks like.
You hit on it briefly, Jacqueline, and we talked about this. We want people who are very curious into our organization. What are some of the characteristics you value, you look for in someone to be a team member? Because I think when we were talking before, you mentioned that most of the people who go into leadership roles there are promoted from within. So you start them a little bit early and they have to work their way up. There's not as many external hires into bigger roles. So what do you look for and to help build an organization that's excellent for new candidates to come in?
Yeah. So we pivoted about 2 years ago to this notion of engagement. And if you think about when you go to Starbucks. I mean, you're going to Starbucks, which is the same Starbucks, regardless of where you go in the world, and that's because the focus is on the experience, right? You have the same kind of experience at every single Starbucks that you go into. And we pivoted to engagement, and we actually used a proprietary, we call it an I3 process. We're a consumer products company, right? So when we're developing the next kind of Wheaties or Yoplait or Nature Valley Bar, we want to understand what our consumers value, what they need, what they want. And we actually went out to our employees and we asked them the same question. And we said, what's most important to you? And I think to your point, you have to, 5% of your talent actually deliver 95% of your results. That's research-based. So you've got to know that 5% intimately. What makes them tick? What are they motivated by? What gets them out of bed in the morning? What kind of team are they the most successful in leading or being a part of? Do they like turnarounds? Do they like to walk into hard situations where no one's ever done it before? And you have to be very, very thoughtful around not just the talent, because talent does not equal team. We all know this to be true. The research would also tell you if you have more than two high potential people on a team, it's going to be really hard to foster collaboration, right? So you want to think about the talent, you want to think about the team, you want to think about the environment. What our research told us on engagement is this: people want you to know them individually. They want you to have a customized approach to their development. Not the same as Lara, not the same as Mark. What's important to me? What am I good at? And they want you to accelerate that development, and they want you to be a partner in that development. And so it really does come down to knowing each of your players very individually and being willing to customize their development plan, much like we would do in one of our products.
Interesting. In your world, like I said, you're partnering with a lot. What do you look for in people to partner with? What are the? If I'm in the crowd, I'm thinking like, what are some of the things I could work to develop? Because I think everything's learnable, right? So what are some things that you're looking for in partnerships?
Well, with my different portfolio companies where I try to help.
You want to share some of them for those who don't? Yeah.
Very quickly, I'm working with Savannah James right now, LeBron's wife. We're launching a new organic sports drink. Just finished raising a round of capital. That'll be launching later in June. Working with Derek Jeter on the Players Tribune from the very beginning to where we are now, different sets of challenges. Buna Murray production company from The Real World, Keeping Up with the Kardashians. We're launching all new shows around sports and the motivational elements that come from that. Ad Age, really a trade publication in the advertising and marketing world, focused on how they build that sports landscape, and a handful of other properties. But
I don't know how you have time to do anything.
Yeah, trust me. Well, honestly, it comes down to really doing a deep dive on, well, what are my strengths and how can I help the team with these strengths, and where can I bring in the right team to complement my weaknesses, right? So, and I think every team should think about that. What are your strengths? Going back to, what do you like to do? What are you good at? And I have 2 kids, and I think about the way we were teaching when I was a young adult, even when coaching. Well, what are you good at? Let's focus on that. So I'm a big believer in practice what you preach. That everybody that I work with knows that I'm constantly doing developmental work. I know where my weaknesses are. Look, I'm doing this too. I think customizing developmental work is really smart. I was fortunate that I came up through GE and NBC, and I got great developmental work, but it was this cookie cutter thing that was really helpful for me. But I think that's a really smart vision. But I think practice what you preach. The kind of people that we want to bring into a company is a lot like sports. It's really a lot like sports. So I think we don't have to make it that complicated. Are these people that you want to be in the trenches with? Again, like my big takeaway is don't look for logos. I don't care where you coached before you were here. I really don't. That might help. But are you going to roll up your sleeves and get dirty when we need to? Can I trust you? Can you trust me? And do people want to be around you? Do they want to work with you? So to me, those are the most important things in terms of once you get in, now let's kind of assess what your strengths are. Let's put you in a position to win. Yeah. But if you want to grow, let's grow together. Let's figure out. So I do this in every one of my portfolio companies, 6 of them. I will join at least 4 face-to-face meetings with team members, and everyone has to participate, even if it's not your topic. So I can learn a little bit about what you're doing. And then this way I could say, well, what do you want to do? What's next? And one thing I do that takes up a lot of my time is I use my network, so I'll probably be reaching out to a lot of people in the room. You're going to mentor somebody that is looking for this X, Y, and Z sort of growth. So external mentors for me has been huge, helped me professionally. Now connecting dots, saying, look, I understand you want to do this. Here are 3 people I can introduce you to. It's your job to make them intrigued enough to want to give you some counsel.
Yeah,
that make sense?
It does. It makes me think of everyone here at some point is going to have superstars that work for them. And sometimes you can't retain them forever, right? They want to grow, they want to go on. And there are some that are in this room, obviously. So each of you, where you've worked, have people who it's hard to retain them. They're getting phone calls and recruiters, and they have opportunity out there. Your best people, this is happening all the time. So maybe we'll start again with Lara. Like, what are some of the things to do for those who we've identified this person they make it happen. Like, they're a superstar for us. What can we do to whether, they like to be challenged, right? They like to make sure that they're growing, they're progressing. So what are some things that you all do in regards to retaining top talent?
I think one of the things is, I would say in the sports world, there isn't always a standard, career progression. And so those people that are the top talent, we are trying to figure out that combination of what motivates them and really what we're looking for, right? Because in any employment situation, we're not a placement office. It has to be mutually beneficial. We're trying to figure out what that mix is on how those things work. And so some of what we can do in a lot of cases, people aren't really looking to be in sports and stay in the same job, even though I was talking earlier about some people in our staff that have been there 40 some years in the same role. So finding out if they know, they're comfortable in their skin, they know what they're good at, they know what they want to do, and then having that conversation to say, here's what we can put together. One of the most successful things that we've done, and I've done that also in my previous jobs in Atlanta, is that, trying to put them on certain committees, and it sounds a little bit like what Mark's talking about, just, it doesn't matter that that's your area. One of the most recent things that we've done, which has been highly interesting and successful, is we had an innovation day. And everybody could participate. And then we have a bunch of innovation committees on social media, on Viking Lakes, on some of these different things. And you didn't have to be the subject matter expert. You could express interest, and you were going to be put on this committee. And so they feel like they have a say. They're learning, they're finding out about what other people do, and they feel like there's some development, even if it isn't necessarily a title development. And they understand that the leadership team is watching this to say that they are doing their own development, and they understand the importance of these other functions, even if that's not what their actual subject matter expertise is. And that has been a huge retention tool in a lot of sports teams. I will say the Vikings do it a lot, and there's many other teams that do it as well. And we use it honestly as an effort to do retention, because we know we can't necessarily get them to that next level. And then when it gets to the point where we can't necessarily grow them, we use our network and send them to the other teams or the other sports entities that they can take that next step in their career. And so again, this aspect of these themes that we've all talked about is that people know that we care about them individually and we want them to succeed in whatever their goal is. And if we can't have that, we're going to be sad to see them go, but we're going to use our network to try to get them, whether it's a corporate sponsor or it's another team, to try to get them to where they want to advance to.
Yeah, playing the long game is always the right game to play, and sometimes your superstars, it's time for them to go. And I think for like your reputation or the organization's reputation, if you're known as someone who holds somebody back because you don't want to lose them, long term that's not a winning play. Like, 'cause sometimes they have to go. So sometimes the way to retain great people is actually to let them go.
Tampering exists. You all know that word, right? So tampering exists, and we acknowledge that piece. And I'm fortunate in all the organizations that I've worked with, we have never held people back because that's just not the way the world works. And so, in a lot of cases, I've had people boomerang back because they knew that we really cared for them individually and we wanted what was best for them.
Yeah. What about you, Jacqueline? What do you think?
So you talked about top talent. So the first question is, do you know who those top talent are? That's question number one, right? And so, we spend a lot of time at General Mills really identifying who are those 5%, what is important to them, what are they good at, what do they need to get better at, what are their aspirations, might be the same as ours or may not, and putting together accelerated development plans. So these are plans that are different than what exists for any other employee at General Mills. They are accelerated, and they will include both internal and external kind of ways. And then we hold our leadership team accountable. So everyone on my leadership team at the senior level of the organization knows who these individuals are, knows what their development plan looks like. There are measures in terms of, are they progressing? Are they doing what they said they were going to do? We're checking in on their performance and their potential regularly. In fact, my CEO, in every single meeting that we have our leadership team together, there are 3 things we focus on: the business, the team, and the talent. So there is tone at the top. It is important to our CEO, and he builds it into every single meeting we have, so everyone on his team also understands it's equally important. And then we measure it. Right? So if we say we're going to promote these folks on an accelerated rate, are we doing it? If not, why not? What do we need to do differently?
One of the things you mentioned before, I think that was really caught my eye or caught my ear was, if somebody's seeking out proactively, that means they're looking for clarity. Can you explain what you meant by that? Like they're not receiving that clarity inside.
Yeah, so we were talking about the fact of, certainly the war for talent is here to stay. It will never go away, no matter what. And so whenever someone takes a phone call from a headhunter, my belief is they're probably making the return phone call because they don't have clarity at the place they're employed. And what a headhunter can do is to give you clarity. Now, we all know that it can be built on a bunch of ifs and ands and buts and promises and commitments and those sorts of things that may or may not come true. But if the phone call's being taken, it's probably because they're missing something in your organization. I often think it's clarity. I think the other reason is that relationship with their manager. I mean, we all know that your direct boss actually makes all of the difference, whether or not you feel engaged and valued at work. And so we spend a ton of time making sure our middle managers, because here's the thing, most folks get it, they get the CEO, they love the CEO, they love the leadership team, they think they've got that figured out. But when you get to the middle in the organization, sometimes that's where the clarity actually is far less than it could be. And so really spending time and making sure that those folks that are 2 and 3 levels down from all of you are crystal clear on what you're trying to do, the culture you're trying to create, what's most important to you, the talent that's most important to you, and that you're giving everyone that visibility is really very, very important as you think about not only building the right talent and team, but back to the culture piece for sure.
Yeah, and I just add a couple of thoughts. The 5% is just so important because I think everybody that's in here, you were going out and doing this stuff without somebody building all these tools for you to do it. All the great ones, find the mentor, get to the CEO, share these new ideas. That you can't do all the work for everybody because you're not going to see the tenacity that you need to get them into the 5%. That you also got to know who's your bottom 5%. It's not an easy conversation to have, but it's one that I force all my portfolio companies to have every time we're talking about culture. So who's leading, who's holding us back? Because when you're in a startup, your team is literally the most important thing. that if you have people that are holding you back, that in one portfolio company I work with right now is a tech company in San Francisco, you want to talk about a war for talent. It is out of this world. And one negative apple becomes 2, 3 very quickly, that you have to address it fast and double down on the folks that want to be there, that want to change the culture, which I think is important.
Speaking of that, you recruit in a extremely competitive environment. You just mentioned, like, you have people who have an offer from Facebook or Snapchat and from Mark French. How are you, like, what are some of the keys to be attractive to in-demand candidates?
I think there's a lot of variables. So one, it's who's behind the company, what's the vision for the company, is it solving a problem that is intriguing to the candidate? So this has been a big learning for me, is fish where the fish are. Find people that share that passion for whatever it is you're trying to solve, and go after the best candidate to start. And what I mean by that is I go to the guys at Facebook and Google and I'll share what we're doing. And if it's, well, look, let me know when you've had an IPO and then we'll have a conversation, then they're not a right culture fit. But if it's actually really believe in that problem you're trying to solve, even if they're not going to make the jump to come to a startup, they're going to have 15 candidates that I would never otherwise have the ability to get to. Well, you know what? You should talk to Sally. She's actually thinking about the same sort of thing, and Sally leads to 10 other people. So I think the credibility of who's behind the business, I'm very fortunate. I work with celebrity athletes. So when you hear it's Derek Jeter's business, it's Dwayne Wade's business, it's Serena's business, and they're not just endorsers, they put their money up with me and everybody else, and people tend to follow that sort of vision and philosophy where they'll at least listen. But if we can't deliver on this is what the business is, here are the goals, it's not going to be a worthwhile conversation.
The who is everything, right? Who you surround yourself with becomes who you become, and your success or failure will hinge on that. So maybe for Lara or for Jacqueline, what are things that you do at the Vikings or with General Mills that makes it an attractive place for these, like I was saying, the high caliber, in-demand candidates to say, I want to work for the Minnesota Vikings?
Well, I'll say philosophically, I'll start out at a different point to say, I think at different points in your career, you need different things. And so for the super high caliber people at whatever level, there is something that's there. And so we rely heavily on our culture and somewhat our name and our brand that's there, but it's really our style that we're looking for. And the high caliber people, they could be high caliber, but not our culture. And so it's really important that their person that we're talking to, is comfortable in their skin, they kind of know that piece, and then they can see, like, we want you to be a leader in this role, and this is the specifics. Part of the other connection, I think, as we just said a little bit, was making sure people have clarity and they understand your expectations. And sometimes when you go into an interview process, I recently went through one myself, that aspect of people saying, here's what I want you to do, here's what I need you to do, and here's what I can give you in your career. That sounds so elementary, but there's very few people that can really articulate that in a very personal, meaningful way. And understanding how to make that connection with those candidates is super, super important. A lot of the high caliber people, if you talk about like players, we recently had, some people heard, Barr came back to us. He took a pay cut. It was a culture aspect that's there. Is that common? Mark probably knows more than me. No, that is not common at all. But from the business perspective, on that decision process, there is something that is a trigger. And the aspect of probably, I would say a general philosophy of wanting people to be successful is important. And when we're going after those top talent people, and we know that they have multiple offers, my framework has always been, let me give you all of the information that you need to know to make the best decision for you. And we're going to lay it out good, bad, and ugly. And then everything that you're walking into, our expectations are clear, you understand what's out there. And so there isn't a dog and pony show going on here. This literally is, this is who we are. And this is why we think you'd be the best fit. This is where we think your career can go. And then it's all laid out for them. And I feel like that has been a good clarity because, again, not a placement office, want it to be mutually beneficial. It's really important to have that trust from the beginning, is so people understand that you're laying it out for them and saying, what do you want? What information are you missing in your decision process? What's holding you up in that? And having that conversation really helps to me solidify that investment from the beginning. They know right from the interview process that we are trying to do what is in the best interest for them and their career.
Transparent, they know what's up and what's coming from the job.
Yeah, these are all really good points. So I think the passion piece is a big deal. I think the purpose is really important. It's not just purpose in terms of what your company is doing, but actually what your company is doing for the world and the community. Our employees more than ever are saying, hey, we don't count on anyone other than big companies to actually make a difference in the world. And so we have been putting a lot of time and effort both on the environment sustainability space for sure. What I would also tell you is that, listen, this sounds super simple, but people just want to belong. They want to be in a place where they're like, these are my people. I feel like I can show up, it's safe, I can bring ideas to the party, I can be appreciated, my ideas will be valued. You know me as an individual, you understand what makes me different than everyone else, and difference is good because when you have diversity around the table, you will have more ideas, they will be better ideas, you will have an environment where you can be challenged regardless of level in the organization. And so it sounds super simple, but at the end of the day, I really do think, at least the folks that are joining our organization are saying, I just want to be in a place where I can belong. And notice I did not say agreement, because they aren't looking to join an organization where we all say the same things, because that's no fun, and frankly, those organizations aren't going to win. They are looking for a place where their ideas can be, they're asked, they're valued, and they're appreciated. And so we're spending a ton of time on that right now, and it happens at the micro level. I'm here to tell you it happens with the manager, it happens with those direct team members. There's only so much that the CEO and his team can say. It's going to be about, hey, when I was in that meeting with Mark and I brought up that idea, how did it go? Was I asked the second question? If I didn't speak, was I asked for my opinion and was it valued? That's the stuff that really makes a difference, I think, for our employees.
Part of what everyone here wants to do too at some point is or most people, is they want to get promoted. And Lara, you have a really interesting story because you're newly into the role here with the Vikings. And I found kind of your path, I mean, all your paths, I'd like to hear from all of them, but since yours just is most recent, could you share, because I think not only are we about leading our organizations and doing that effectively, but each person here is a person and they're looking to grow and improve for themselves. So maybe on a more personal level, what was that process like? How did you get this huge job with the Vikings? What was your path to get there? Because I think learning from each of your paths could potentially be helpful for each person here as they're in the middle of theirs.
Yeah, I'm probably going to go back. So I started in a very similar world of public accounting. Public accounting in sports, right? Just like that. I was at Coopers & Lybrand, old enough for some of you might have known that firm, and someone I worked with went to go be the first CFO for the Detroit Tigers. And so I was in HR at the time. I started out as an auditor, I switched into HR, and I was feeding resumes. And then one day he called and said, oh, hey, we're looking for an HR person. Do you know anyone? They need to have union experience. I'm like, I don't know anyone off the top of my head, but I'm sure I can find someone. And then they said, oh, well, we kind of thought you would be interested. And I said, I don't know if I'm qualified, but I'm interested. Fast forward, I get the job, and I was just telling people before this session, the president said to me, hey, Lara, I just wanted to make sure you understood 3 people turned down the job before you got it. And I was like, is this supposed to be motivational to me? Because I'm really not getting it. And he said, no, I need you to understand the reason why they turned it down is because you had to create your own department. There had never been a human resource department, right? I wasn't a baseball fan at the time. I didn't know anything other than the basics, right? And he said from the beginning, that's important that you know. And I would fast forward on and say, since that point, I have not had to actively search for a career. Or a position, I would say. From leaving the Detroit Tigers, I got to the Atlanta Braves because my advocate, which all of you in your networking world have an advocate, basically called and said, hey, they're looking for an HR person who knows baseball. Coming to get to the Vikings, a friend of mine 14 years ago from the Tigers had connected Kevin, Warren, and myself to meet with the Wilf family prior to them owning the franchise. Kevin went to the Vikings. I went to the Atlanta Braves. We kind of tangentially stayed in touch. Fast forward, some of you know the Atlanta Braves had a GM that was banned for life, had the Pete Rose treatment. And Kevin sent me a resume for someone that was a compliance officer. And, now kind of go full circle, look up Super Bowl, oh, Kevin's actually the COO. He's not just the chief legal officer. Advocate, relationship, networking to go through. The HR person last June put in her notice. She was a director level person. And then Kevin basically had the Korn Ferry recruiters call me up. So that's my quick story into sports. But the part that I really try to focus on a lot, especially for people who are wanting to be in the sports field, is that you don't really know where that network and your advocate might come from, or why they're there. And so if you know what you want and you're prepared, when those opportunities come up, and especially in sports, it is a right time, right place, I think, on here's the right person that I want to work for. I don't know if that's hitting all the high points, Ryan, that we spoke of before, but it was interesting along the way as I look at it now to say, okay, now I'm well into my career. What are those areas of success on why I got to be where I am? And I think part of it was I was willing to jump into situations that maybe were not traditionally looked at as amazing, even though they were with a giant sports team. I love the fact that Mark says, I don't want to know about the logo. 100% of all of my positions have been brand, big companies, but repeatedly my supervisors have told me one of the best characteristics is that you're focused on what you love. And it's not the brand, right? There's a lot of you that are good at a lot of things, but that might not be your career. So if you can find out what you're good at and what you're passionate about, that's the crossover.
And part of the way I think to build that relationship is if you're willing to run towards the fire a bit. It sounds like you do that with intuitively, and tackle it and aggressively seek it out. That it could then 14 years later get a phone call saying this is it, and you didn't know 14 years ago this could happen. I think that's a commonality I've found in hundreds of people I've spoken to. They have this willingness and ability to say, nobody really wants to do that. I'm going to go do it and do it with vigor, and they're excited and they make something happen. Jacqueline, so or did you want to keep going, Lara?
No, I was just going to say, and there's other things, and we had one before. Lisa, someone else who was here, Jacqueline, had the story of, you don't know where that advocate might come from. It might not be your traditional route. You could have met someone in the hallway, and they said, you know what, Mark is amazing. We need to hire him. And they're going to try and find a place because that 5% is hard to identify. And so you just always, again, comfortable in your skin, be yourself. You don't know where that connection is going to come from.
Yeah. My ad would be, it's the classic kind of know thyself. Like, do you really know what you are exceptional at? Do you really know what you're not really good at? And despite how hard you work at it, you're never going to be good at it, because I have some of those things for sure. And do you know the kind of boss you work best? And we all have folks that you're like, gosh, I can remember when I was at my best. What was going on for you? What kind of work were you doing? What was the team makeup like? What was your boss like? And really spend some time reflecting on that, because you can then start to navigate to places where you will be your best a lot easier than places where you're maybe fighting against what your natural tendency and strengths might be. And then tell people about it. I think both your messages are so important, because once you're clear on what you want and the kind of environment that you are your best, take the opportunity to tell your friends, your family, the folks that you go to church with, the folks that you meet in the hallway. It will click in for someone, and someone will remember, I remember meeting this person who told me that they would love ... and you've got that. That's how the magic really happens, but it starts with being clear with yourself in terms of what you really want and where you're your best.
I asked you before we started if you ever had a real job, and so because your path is amazing, you're doing a lot of different things. What would you add to this when it comes to building your career?
Yeah, I mean, without the dedication, hard work, you can't get around hard work. Yep. You just can't get around it. Curiosity, ability to network. I wouldn't be where I am today. So I was at NBC Universal. Working my way up the ranks through sales and marketing. NBC had just bought back the rights to Sunday Night Football at the time. And it was a major investment. I was very low on the totem pole. And I literally was playing flag football on my weekends. And I was living in California at the time, hundreds of thousands of the target demo that we're trying to get with Sunday Night Football, playing flag football. And then I was curious enough to say, well, what's the business model behind that, and how could 1 + 1 potentially equal 5? Long, boring story short, I convinced NBC at the time that rather than just selling 30-second spots in primetime football, let's build an events business. Let's go get in front of these 250,000 men that are playing flag football that we want to watch the game, and go after event marketing dollars that want to get in front of these people with product. Created the Sunday Night Flag Football Tournament. Now we've got the U.S. Army who couldn't afford to buy 30-second spots, doing recruiting at these events. Local car dealers could put their cars physically in front of these guys. And that kind of put me on the map in terms of, it ended up becoming an $18 million new business of just event dollars. And that gave me a lot of enemies, to be honest, internally. Who's this young guy that's telling us we need to do things different? How do you navigate that? Not with ego, but by trying to build camaraderie, and here's why it's a benefit to all these different divisions. That it actually gave me the ability to bring another idea to the table. And that idea was literally putting TVs in the back of taxi cabs. And you asked, because you interviewed her, I find that so fascinating, a woman by the name of Beth Comstock, now on the board of Nike. She was co-chairman at GE. When everybody in the building was telling me that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, putting a TV in a taxi cab, why would we do that? Well, and how many cabs do you have? I literally had one taxi cab at the time, one. Because like the event business, there's a whole out-of-home advertising business that CBS has, but they're doing print. We can get ahead of this and do digital. Everybody told me, forget it, except for Beth Comstock, who wasn't my boss, which I think is really important. She was 4 levels ahead. And she said, well, man, this French kid actually has something. So just stuck to it, right? And it wasn't just building a PowerPoint, it was going out and getting a deal with the city of New York, getting the taxi cab guys to agree to do it, and then saying, okay, it's 1 right now, but I can get it to 18,000. And then got a little bit of financing internally and hired the right people out of the gates. And then it ended up becoming its own division, which was screens and arenas, Walmart, supermarket. Yeah. That gave me the entrepreneurial chops because I had the Peacock NBC logo to kind of help me where I made a lot of mistakes early on because I had the support of a great team behind me that it worked. And then that eventually gave me the courage to go invent a product with Dwayne Wade that you put on the bottom of your sneakers to have better traction on basketball courts, which became Court Grip. So long way of saying, yeah, I definitely did have plenty of jobs. But the same playbook, what I'm doing now, hard work, be a good teammate to everybody.
Idea generation pops into my mind. Are you always?
Yeah, but you know what? It's what I'm doing now is they're not my ideas. Yeah. So yeah, I've got a few in the back of my mind at the appropriate time, but you know, Derek Jeter has a great idea. Let's create a media outlet where athletes can tell their own stories uninterrupted. Yep. Brilliant. Here are the 50 mistakes I made. Let's avoid those. Let's build the right culture. You know, now I have a technology product launching literally this week with DJ Khaled, Live Nation, Rock Nation, William Morris. Entrepreneur behind that had the idea. Here are the mistakes we can avoid. Yep. Here are the things that we could do that'll save you 2 years.
Yeah.
So
I'm gonna pause for a second. Is there a question or a question somebody had any here? I saw Brian might have been raising his hand. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, Mark. Brian Wish. I had a quick question about your corporate background and maybe how you brought it into your startups and experience, maybe the processes. You know, how has corporate helped you, and what are some of the applicable things you've done within the companies you've invested in or started?
Yeah, real quick, I tell everybody I could not have started my own businesses had I not worked at NBC Universal. It was my graduate program, and it wasn't because someone was teaching me how to do it. It was because I was making mistakes, I was networking, I was talking to people that were a lot further along than I was, and asking them, how'd you start Bravo? Like, Bravo just started. I remember you have to have the guts to go ask that question. You got to be willing to take a risk that they're going to say, no, I'm not going to talk to you. But I took a lot from corporate America that I brought into the entrepreneurial world. Something I tell all my teams, I picked up in NBC, the 3 Ps: purpose, process, payoff. I start every meeting. What's the purpose? What's the process? What's the payoff? I can tell you 90% of the people that got that training with me don't do it to this day. It just stuck with me. So some things are going to stick with you, some things aren't. The network. Everybody in this room has an unbelievable logo on your business card. You can get to almost anybody in your world. You can get to anybody with NBC. It's just, do you have the right vision to get to the people that you want to get to? You want to create an events business. NBC's not in the events business, but I'm interested in hearing what NBC thinks. So the network's really important. And just some of that blocking and tackling. I would have never learned about finance. When we eventually built NBC Everywhere, they then came to me and said, you're working with all these digital companies. Why don't you work with a Peacock equity fund and tell us if there's anything we should invest in? I had no clue about M&A, investing, no idea. But yeah, I'll try that. Well, no one's done it before. Great, that sort of thing. Let me take a crack at it. So it's a long-winded way of saying everything you're doing, maximize the network, maximize the opportunity to learn from those around you. And I'm getting older, I gotta write stuff down. And especially with our phones now, if something's in your mind, if it's an idea or if it's a best practice, write it down.
One last question for each show. I'll start with Lara. Mark had brought up the fact of mistakes, and I think we're all kind of fascinated to learn from the mistakes of others, so hopefully we don't make them. And so this is kind of a combo question of, what are maybe some mistakes you made that you would then tell your younger self, or perhaps somebody who's earlier in their career, to say, I did this, and I'm glad I did because I learned from it, but maybe you could avoid it. What are, for each of you, start with Lara, to say that I could help?
You know what, and it just, only just because Mark had said this, and it strikes me as a characteristic that's really strong in you, is resilience and just persistence. And I think on my younger self, right, I had made my own obstacles and barriers that really didn't exist. And somehow when you feel like you're at a certain level, whatever that level is, suddenly you feel like, oh, I can do anything. I can bring up an idea that I'm not a subject matter expert in. And so my younger self, I wish that even though I did a lot of things that people, especially my parents, oh my gosh, when I switched into HR, I killed someone. My dad was so disappointed. But from the perspective of, going off on something that seems risky, but going at it with the idea of there really is no limits on what you're trying to do. And that was one, and many different turns in my life. I remember thinking, like, what was the worst thing that was going to happen? Like, they were going to tell you no, okay. They weren't going to torture you. It wasn't going to be that bad. But I think that relentless kind of spirit and not creating barriers for yourself, one of them in particular, and we were talking about this beforehand, is there's very few females, especially female executives in sports. And so early on in my baseball career, I had kind of stepped back a little bit, and you can probably tell I like to talk. So I was trying to fit in a weird way because I was the only woman in the room. And that was the stupidest thing I could have done because I really wanted to hear my female perspective. And it was because I created my own barriers. I created my own obstacles on myself. And so once I got over that, suddenly then the world seemed like a different place, even if I was the only woman in the room.
Nice. Jacqueline?
Yeah, I guess my reflection would be you will always, always, always and forever have a day where you feel like you don't know what you're doing. There will always be a day where you're like, I actually have no idea what to do in this situation. I've never seen this before. I don't know if I can do it. And I used to get pretty hard on myself, thinking, gosh, I don't know if I can figure this out. And then I'd remind myself, I've always figured it out before. And you might not figure it out on the day that you realize that you don't have the answers, but you always figure it out. And you just kind of, I think the ability to be patient with yourself, to remind yourself you're all here because you're really talented. People have placed you into these jobs. They had a lot of different choices. They chose all of you to be here. And so just on those moments where you wonder if you can, remember that you always have made it. And you'll continue to figure that out. Leverage that network, have confidence in yourself, and then make sure you've got a great partner at home. Friends, family, because these jobs, I know these jobs are tough. And there are going to be days when you're going to rely on that support system outside of this place. So make sure that's equally strong as you're working on the support system within your own university.
I think Coach called it cold winters, right? In the other room. There's going to be some cold winters from time to time. You got to have that support staff. What about you, Mark?
I'll start with something that I've gotten lucky in terms of the ball breaking the right way. And I said it before, I just want to reiterate it before I move on. When the moment presents itself, be ready. As simple as that may sound, but be prepared. Really be prepared. When you present that idea, especially younger generations, I do a lot of speaking with younger generations right now, and the entrepreneur word is very compelling. But really be prepared. Have your plan buttoned up. And there are a handful of times where maybe I wasn't where I should have been. But again, do the work. If you work hard, you're going to get to where you want to be. But I think for me, I've made a few mistakes on culture and have gotten so excited about the deal. Now, this is in the later part of the career where just want to get into a company, want to invest in a company, or take a board seat, or want to merge a company, and it's just looks so great, or didn't do the due diligence on culture, and made that mistake maybe once. But it's funny, I was reflecting on it with one of my co-founders who's come along with me on a variety of journeys, and said, yeah, those worked out well, but we didn't really know who was on the other side of the table. Take the time to really get to know somebody that you're going to be working with and go into business with. Not just impress them to get the offer or to get the deal, but I'm a big guy, let's go work out. Mm-hmm. Let's spend some time together, or let's get a meal. I want you to meet my wife. That kind of stuff is important.
Love it. This is really great stuff. Let's give it up for Lara, Jacqueline, Mark. Good stuff. Thank you.